Hello, everyone. My name is Janet Reckman.
Janet, just wait 1 second.
Right.
They're still joining. We're still getting
okay.
people.
Give me a clue, okay, when I should.
I will.
Thank you.
All right, go ahead and start.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Janet Reckman. I'm the Social Policy Chair for the League of Women Voters, and I'm very pleased to welcome you and our panelists to this afternoon's second of 3 webinars on homelessness in our community, homelessness from crisis to care. Part 2 is about what is our response. We've talked about the path from crisis to care and how people will be homeless. They may go into improvised shelter, they may go into a formal shelter, they may have supportive services, but ultimately the solution to homelessness is permanent housing. And so that's what we mean when we talk about the path from crisis to care. You may go in many directions on the path. It's not always a one-way street, but it is hopefully steps toward permanent housing. I want to thank members of the committee who helped pull this together: Mary Kay Benson, Nicole Drummond, Shelley Gates, Andy Holcomb, and Charles Withune. You'll get a chance to meet them at the end of the presentation. And again, the first program was about what's going on with homelessness. This part is about so what kinds of solutions address it. And then the third one, which will be next semester, will be now what can we do next? Just a brief review of the first session. How did people become homeless? Climate refugees, particularly in our community after the wildfires. Public policy, which has led to closing of certain resources or changes in available housing. Shelter crisis, the availability of shelter places to go. There's only so many places and there are more people who need help. Health crisis, particularly for older people, or changes in life where people who are uninsured or for some reason cannot have lost resources they need to pay for housing and dedicated in other areas. And personal crises ranging everything from addiction, problems with losing a job, family issues, domestic violence, incarceration, a whole variety of things. So there are lots of reasons why people become homeless. If you're more interested in more detail, you can look at the first session. The link is on the League of Women Voters website. The other thing to know is that the housing need in California, the reason people become homeless is there aren't enough houses. And you can see here in 2021, the number was 2.5 million houses is needed in all income ranges. So today, we want to look at solutions that address the challenges of homelessness along the path. To start with, just really briefly, is to say, look at this. We are spending twice as much money on chronic homelessness as we are on supportive housing. So we're spending twice as much and getting less. And this is but the focus today is to look on what we can spend less on and get more out of. With that in mind, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Manny Escalante, who's vice president with the North State Shelter Team. Manny has over 20 years of experience developing and growing fitness businesses, and he's passionate about walking alongside and finding solutions for people in need, including unemployed, underemployed, and the unhoused. Shelley, can we have Manny, please?
Hi, everyone. Thanks.
On there.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Thank you to the League and to OLLI and to all of the attendees here. So again, my name is Manny, and today I want to briefly discuss some shelter solutions. As we've seen, the path to permanent housing is that it's a path and it takes steps. And so what we want to present, on behalf of North State Shelter Team, some solutions that are exciting because not only are they additional solutions, but they're implemented currently in various places throughout the country. We can go next slide. So let's take a step back and talk about a definition of poverty. So poverty has many faces, changing from place to place and across time. It has been described in many ways. Most often, poverty is a situation people want to escape. Here's the exciting part for all of us. Poverty is a call to action for the poor and the wealthy alike. So that involves all of us here, a call to change the world so that many more have enough to eat, adequate shelter, access to education and health, protection from violence, and a voice in what happens in our community. So poverty is a lot of things. What excites me is that poverty is a call to action that we can all actively participate in. Go ahead. And what we need is more choices and more options. As you can see, we'll get a chance to hear from Mr. Mayor a little bit later today, and he's pivotal in our community and has come to the acknowledgement. We need more. We need 2 or 3 campgrounds as one of the solutions. And that's what we really want to express is solutions currently exist. So Pallet Shelter, Jesus Center, Torres, Everhart Village, Safe Space, the area even at Cohasset and Eaton, additional dwelling units, affordable housing. It's a yes and hopefully the yes and taps into well, those of you who are fans of improv and maybe some theater background, right? About it's in addition to continuing the conversation, if you will. And let's talk a little bit more about what that yes and can be. Go ahead. So if we talk about today, we'll want to present 3 different shelter solutions. So safe parking, tiny homes as individuals and tiny home communities, and managed campgrounds. Go ahead. If we look at safe parking, so I'd like to spend a little bit of time breaking each of these down as what the concept can look like. And again, not only is this what it can look like here in Chico, but the exciting thing is that it's currently existing and being implemented across the country. So a safe parking lot is a parking area designated for sleeping in a vehicle and in an RV. Typically, these are vehicles and RVs that can be moved, meaning they're drivable to some degree. And this can exist in 2 different ways. A permanent location, meaning there is an area designated all the time for the safe parking area. The other way that has been really beneficial and implemented effectively is rotating, meaning we are at the parking lot X for 2 months, and then that gets rotated to a different either business parking lot, faith-based community, public land or private or open land. So that can get rotated as well. The key with this is consistency, so that everybody knows where the safe parking lot is. And again, to create a little bit of stability. The cool thing too is this can have some restrictions. So 7 p.m. to 6 a.m. This has been found effective to have minimal impact on the host facility, whether that's a church or a business. But again, it provides stability for that individual. They have a safe place to sleep, rest comfortably at night, access to bathrooms, access to hand washing, access to water. There is a place that service providers can go to provide these additional services. And you can see at the bottom with all the different logos, again, these are from currently existing programs that are happening throughout the country. Go ahead. The next one is tiny homes and tiny home communities. So this can exist as 1 to 3 tiny homes that are sponsored. Again, similar to the safe parking spot at city and county properties, church or faith-based organizations, private businesses, and obviously land that's purchased specifically for these tiny homes. Typically, these will have a 1 to 5 year commitments if it's not a permanent location. And same idea as before, access to services, hand washing, restrooms, water, meal prep. The other kind of unique thing about this one here is the idea is that the residents of these tiny homes become integrated into the community. It's not someone living in the corner and no one knows anything about them. This is a member of that community. And there's a variation of applicant screening, low cost to no cost. Those can serve as individuals, again, 1 to 3. There's also really, really good work being done across the country for communities. And I've shown some examples here, Opportunity Village up in Oregon, Hope Village, Chippewa Falls, just had their grand opening for the village. They've been doing tiny homes. They're out of Minnesota. And I'm going to let Brandon talk a little bit more. I'm not going to let, apologies, Brandon. Brandon's going to talk a little bit more about specifics of tiny homes. So he'll dive into more detail on that. Go ahead. The next piece is managed campground. This one is really exciting for North State Shelter Team. So I'll give an overview. Managed campgrounds are just what they sound like. It's a campground, meaning multiple ways that an individual can stay there. That's a tent, that's a car. It could incorporate some of the tiny homes that we talked about, some micro shelters. So the idea is to have one place. And what is the managed part? The managed is that there is a system that people go into the campgrounds. There's the rules and some regulations around what a resident is required to do. There's a participant agreement that talks about the monthly fee, the expectations, the volunteer requirements. This would be secure, fenced, gated, has standalone water system, solar panels, a management office, tent decks, so it's not just on hard floor on the ground, elevated from running water or standing water, waste management for trash disposal. We've all seen a lot of trash in our city. If there's no place to put it, it's hard to put it somewhere except on the ground. And this is one of those solutions. Shower trailer, porta potty, hand washing station, food prep area. So really, wind and sun protection, so really all encompassing camping opportunity. Now, go ahead and next slide. So we want to bring this up. The North State Shelter has submitted a proposal to the city, as we've talked about previously, land, like where the heck do we put a safe parking spot, tiny homes, and a campground? We have land available now. So this is the overview of what this campground can look like here in Chico. You can see it's divided into 3 different areas, giving us an opportunity to get really good at managing the campground and being able to intake residents there in a staggered manner. I'll talk a little bit more about what the campground, what this proposal looks like. Go ahead. So this managed campground in a binder, that's what this is referring to, the managed campground proposal. It contains a business plan. How the heck are we going to pay for this? What does funding look like? The budget right now is 0 additional cost to the city specifically. So there's obviously fundraising that's going to be involved, grants that are going to be involved, but it involves the business plan, the manual that has how is this going to be monitored and guided, security plan, an intervention plan, because we know that sometimes people have disagreements. So how do we handle that disagreement? It's written in there. Safety and evacuation plan, alcohol and drug policy, couples policy. So we're great today, but what happens when we break up? Who leaves this campground? That's written ahead of time. Again, mentioning, the work that needs to be done in the community is going to be done by the community. And that's the biggest success that these organizations have had running this is community based. Kind of like we have neighborhood watches at a lot of our neighborhoods for those of us that are housed. I'm looking out for my neighbor. The idea is very similar here in this managed campground, where the residents are going to be looking out for themselves. So with this proposal, the city, we asked for them to honor an easement to access the land, issue an administrative use permit. They've given us a couple of other organizations that they want us to follow up with. So we're in the process of doing that now. And then really we're requesting support from the city to make this a viable solution. Obviously, we can't do it alone. Go ahead, next slide. And just taking a step back for North State Shelter as an entity and the managed campground, there's support from various other service providers. So you can see the service providers here and businesses who not only have said, I would support this, but they have supported it with time, money, supplies, expertise, and guidance. So again, the three, right? Safe parking spot, tiny homes, managed campgrounds. It's a yes and. And hopefully that sparks some interest and excitement in the conversation. I appreciate your time. Next slide. You can get a little bit of information about us at, you can see the email address there and also on Facebook.
Thank you, Manny. I forgot to mention, but if you have questions or comments from Manny, please put them in chat or in the Q&A on your screen. I see there's a question here. Andy, unmute, please.
Yeah, I'm on I didn't mean to raise my hand actually, but my question in the chat was really just how can we get that so that all the panelists, all the attendees can see the questions that are floating amongst the panelists. And I think Mary Kay and someone else is going to handle that.
Right. Mary Kay and Nicole, questions or comments?
Well, so far we have a question from one panelist to another. Ed Mayer is asking, the tiny homes Manny speaks of, are they code and zoning compliant or require a local declaration and maintenance of a quote unquote shelter crisis to circumvent the code and zoning requirements? Do you know that yet, Manny?
Brandon may be able to have a little bit better insight into that. I don't know specifically for Chico. I know that the Chippewa Falls, the Minnesota one, has they are zoned appropriately for the housing and to have the community of housing there. So from what I know, not Chico directly, maybe Brandon can speak to it a little bit more than I can.
Yeah, there are the ones that I'm building are fully code compliant zoning. They're regular houses. They just happen to be 300 square feet. So I've followed all the rules, the normal rules. There are tiny homes that there are options that can be added into the building code, adopted, that allow lesser degree of things. Like, for example, I believe that the building code, like the pallet shelters are built under a certain code, but they're not fully code compliant for like a permanent structure. They're more of a temporary structure. So, some tiny homes are on wheels, and then they go, there's a whole different code compliant things for that. Anyways, you could go on and on all that.
We'll have a chance to hear more from Brandon in a minute. I think there's one more question and then we'll move on. Q&A, Nicole?
Yes, there is a question from someone in Newark, Union City. Is there a nonprofit affordable housing developer in your area?
Yeah, go ahead, Ed.
Yes.
Yeah, this is Ed Mayer. Just very quickly, there's a number of affordable housing developers in our area. There's a private nonprofit by the name of CHIP, the Community Housing Improvement Program. The Housing Authority has two nonprofit development instrumentalities under its wing. There's other nonprofits doing business in the area, including the North Valley Catholic Social Services and Jamboree Housing Corporation. I'm probably forgetting one or two. So we have a fairly active area.
Okay, I think there's one last question, then we'll move on.
I don't see any more questions, Janet.
Oh,
Yep,
okay.
There's a question. How likely would Chico be to receive exceptions to code requirements?
Oh,
So I think depending on what we're talking around code, there are some with the, because we're in a declared shelter crisis, there is county, there's the availability to supersede some traditional, and I put traditional in quotes, obviously safety is of utmost importance, for any residents, but it can soften maybe some of those requirements or supersede some of those requirements as long as that emergency shelter crisis is in place, and it is currently in place in Chico. So to some degree, there is that availability.
And thank you very much, Manny. We'll come back and we'll have a chance to be more general panel responses toward the end. I want to make sure we have plenty of time for all the speakers. All right.
Thank you again, everyone.
So now Brandon will be Brandon Slater, who has been a champion of innovative directions in permanent housing. He's pioneered small permanent home construction in our area, and he's a third generation builder with strong beliefs in community involvement and engagement. He's chair-elect for the Chico Chamber, board member of the Chico Builders Association, a past president of the Valley Contractors Exchange, involved with the Boys and Girls Clubs of the North Valley, and very involved in church. Plus, he enjoys rock crawling side by side and spending time outdoors with his wife and 3 kids. So Brandon, please. Shelley, can we have Brandon? There we go.
Yeah, thanks for having me, everyone. Been somewhat involved in homeless things for a while now. We did my mom was really involved. She was on the board at the Torres shelter, and then we've been involved with the Jesus Center, as well as chat, just doing construction projects and helping out around those 3 organizations. And so I've been involved in a lot of conversations over the last 10 years. And we're a commercial general contractor traditionally. And a couple of years ago, I just kind of started getting this idea that, I really wanted to just build a house, just because I'd never done it before. And so I bought a lot and built a 3-2 and then a 1-1 ADU to just start kind of gathering data, and then and did a lot of the work with our own forces. And then, I just hearing a lot of these conversations that I was in, talking with the different shelter providers in town, and just the struggle for finding like output out of these, whether it's Torres, Jesus Center, like the gap from the gap from subsidized housing to market rate housing just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And so in my head, I felt like there was a space there for kind of basically to come in and create a new product for the market that would fill the gap in between subsidized housing and market rate housing. In the market rate, I felt like, there'd be an opportunity for the market, for-profit world to come and fill that gap with a new product. So taking my knowledge of construction and my knowledge of, I've worked with a lot of clients over the years that have really tight budgets, and what I always tell them is they've got these grand ideas of how many square feet they need, and when they have a really tight budget, the first thing I always do is say, we got to figure out how the easiest way to cut budget is cut square footage. So that's what I did. I set to work sketching up a bunch of different plans, and if you want to go to the next slide, I came up with this floor plan. I started off with just one of these, and it fits a queen size bed. It's got a full kitchen, full size appliances, a full bathroom. It's actually got a walk-in closet, a washer and dryer. It is it's on a slab. And I kind of came up with these, and then I started digging into our municipal code and the building code and all the SB9 and the ADU laws. And I actually initially submitted this project with, if you see the kind of duplex that's in the front, I actually submitted this project with 2 of those duplexes on each of these 2 lots. And and I had an argument for allowing that with our building code, but I lost that argument. It was one word in SB 9 that was a may instead of shall, and I really wanted to build these following all the rules and not getting any exceptions. So I just wanted to use it as a kind of a pilot program to again gather data, try to see what it costs to build one of these, or I've got 6 of these, and kind of just really, and then at the end with the idea that I'm keeping a list, and I'm really planning on spending on going through all the costs and creating a list for for our leaders in the community, and really the state, maybe too, state level, of, hey, what are some things that we spent money on that just are silly, in my opinion, just were not necessary. And there's certainly a lot of them in my opinion. And how could we drive the cost of these down even more? My current hope is that I can, I tried to design these. So if you go to the next slide. Oh, this is one of my problems. So this lot ended up, it was at the end of a sewer run. There's 2 manholes here for the sewer, and there's one, and basically they both flow away from my property here in the middle. And so I had to actually do a mainline extension, even though the fixture units that I was supplying could have all been fed off the existing stub to my property. I had to do a 40-foot mainline extension, which cost an extra $30,000 that added no value to anybody, right? Nobody can use it. Nobody else can use it. It's just for this one property. So anyways, just an example of kind of wasted money. Okay, can you go to the next slide? So I tried to, so this is actually a duplex here, and you can't, I tried to design these so they didn't look like tiny homes from the front, or it at least looks like a 600 square foot house from the front. In that the right side, this small window over there, is actually the bathroom window for the back unit. And if you see the way the floor plan goes, is basically the front unit enters from the front, and then the back unit, there's a path that goes around, and then they have and both units have their own fenced yard. And then they're not ADA compliant, like full on ADA compliant, but they are, my plan is to, they're fairly ADA friendly, in that there's a sidewalk to them, and they're on grade, and I feel like somebody in a wheelchair could use them. Yeah, if you go to the next slide. So this is again, that was the duplex, and then this is the detached. I've actually planned everything. The city doesn't really know it, but I planned everything for a 4th unit to just in case the state changes the laws. I've actually planned, so there's actually 4 meters. I've got all the sewer and electrical stubbed out for a 4th unit. If they do, there's plenty of room on the property for a 4th unit. And yeah, it'll, like some of the things that Manny was talking about, my hope is that these can, they'll be it'll be kind of a little community. And you can kind of see with the floor plan here that, it's got, it's enough for either a single person or a couple to live in there. I've been thinking about doing a bigger version of this that would be, I was down in Mexico a while ago, and there was like the host house was a Mexican family, and it was just basically a larger version of this, just one big open room, but they had 4 kids in it, and it was one big open room. And I've been playing around with the idea of just building a slightly bigger version of this that you could put maybe a bunk bed or something in, and everybody could all live in one happy family. Can you go to the next slide? So this is about where we're at on them. So this is really happening. We're kind of mid-process, probably be, I don't know, the end of the year or so, maybe first of next year, we'll be done with these. I'm still, my goal here is that I can create kind of my goal is to be able to make 6% for an investor and basically figure out what it costs me to do it, and then just do the math with your expenses and everything. And my goal is to be able to rent them for $600 a month. Not sure if that's doable, but I feel like the market would actually support more than that, probably substantially more than that. And so just trying to figure out, basically what the need. It's going to be interesting. I may end up kind of renting the whole facility to an entity to manage the whole facility. I really haven't locked in on exactly what my plans are. A couple of my workers have been like, they want to live in them. I really haven't landed on completely what I'm going to do with them yet. But right now it's just kind of an exercise of gathering data and see if there's a need for this in the market. I feel like there is. And my general concept is if you can do something that solves a problem and you can make it so it's profitable, I feel like it will kind of solve itself. So that's kind of the gist of it. Yeah, this is just another picture of the progress. This is from a couple weeks ago. So, anyways, that's kind of all I got. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Please put any questions or comments for Brandon or in chat.
We do have one. What lot square footage is needed to fit or allow a dwelling of this type, Brandon?
Sure. So in an R1 zoned, which is what this is, which is your traditional low density residential area. I believe it's 4,500 square feet is the minimum lot size if it's an internal lot, and 5,500 square feet if it's a corner lot. So my general kind of business plan is buying larger lots and splitting them up and then building multiple of these. So I actually bought 3 houses down from this. I bought another house that's a larger lot, and I've split it, or I'm in the process of splitting it into 3 lots, and then I'll do the same thing on that one. I think so.
Nicole, was there something in chat?
In the questions, yeah. Well, I have a question from Becky about landscaping. Will these be landscaped?
Sure. It's gonna there is going to be I would call it very light landscaping. There's going to be like each one's going to have, it's going to have some there's going to be like 1 tree on each lot in the front yard. There's some existing trees already on the site as well. And then kind of some, gravel area. I don't know if I'll plant some, a few kind of bushes across the front or something, but it will have like it's going to have a fence kind of across the front of the property. That's a short fence my thought is, keep dogs in or whatever.
Andy, you had a question? He's gone away. Yeah. Are you there?
I'm there. Now it's just me, but hitting the wrong icon again. Instead of asking a question, I'm raising a hand. But it'll be interesting to see if the code, the R1 density can be lowered or exceptions can be made. I typed a comment earlier that the city council yesterday ended the emergency shelter crisis. I know that's going to change the downtown restaurants. It may not.
Andy, I think you're confusing. I think they said COVID's over or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it was the COVID crisis, but some of the shelter. Anyway, it's a moving target. I'm glad I'm wrong on that. If the shelter declaration crisis to be distinguished from this COVID crisis is still out there. But the shelter crisis does allow relaxing of some code requirements, or I think it does anyway. So that remains to be seen.
Yeah, I believe that. I believe it. It does for kind of temporary solutions, but at least what I'm intending on doing here is more permanent kind of. These are regular houses. So
you're right. It has to be, quote, temporary. That might be 5 years temporary, but it has to be temporary, right?
yeah, correct.
I see there's one more question. And I have one too while we're looking at the question. I'm thinking about what Manny shared about the Eaton Cohasset site. And is that the kind of housing that would be built there? I'm not trying to broker a partnership. I'm just curious, but is that the kind of thing we're talking about, or is yours different?
As far as I understand that the Eaton and Cohasset site would be more, no permanent structures at all. It would be more like tents, Charles, right? Yeah.
Yeah, tents, and they have some parking available there. So that's the current
Okay.
use of Eaton and Cohasset versus what Brandon is building, like he mentioned, a little bit more, not a little, more permanent solution.
Yeah, I would say that I feel like that there is a product or whatever that's in between like the campground and what I'm doing. Because what I'm building is just regular, they're just regular houses. They're just very small. There is more like what Chat's doing with their Everhart Village. Yeah, Everhart Village. I feel like those structures are kind of the in between.
And if I can, the in between structures are also existing in like the Chippewa Falls is more of like on wheels, more of like the traditional tiny house with an expectation that you're there for 6 to 18 months and then moving on to more permanent housing. So that's the model that exists. So it would be kind of a combination that would be great to have here.
And I see another question, another chat. Mary Kay, Nicole.
What arrangements are there for schooling for children who do not have permanent housing? I don't know that you know how to answer that, Brandon.
That's definitely not my that's not my deal.
I think probably when Amber talks, she may be able to speak to that.
Right, yeah.
All right, well, it looks like there's 2 more, and then we'll move on.
And Charles, just it's not a question, it's a comment. There is 14 forward, and they're more Spartan. 14 forward is where, Charles?
Eugene or Medford? Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, or Manny. Okay, great. And then there's one in the Q&A, Nicole.
I think that's the one about the children.
Yeah, I think that's all the questions we have.
Okay, good. Thank you very much, Brandon. I appreciate that. I'm fascinated. I love looking at those pictures. That was very helpful, especially since we saw the picture full grown earlier. So that was very helpful. Thank you very much. Our next, I've got to share the screen. Oh boy. Ladies and gentlemen, please bear with me 1 minute. I knew I was going to mess this up. There we go. There we go. Okay. Our next speaker is Amber Benedict, who's Social Service Director at Chico Housing Action Team, better known as CHAT. And Amber earned her master's degree in social work from CSU Chico with an emphasis on macro social work within systems. She has spent the last 7 years working directly with unhoused populations in Chico with an emphasis on system failures and disconnection, the importance of community, and rebuilding connections for people that rebuilding lost connections for people. Amber?
Hey, that was awesome to learn about the other adventures the other two panelists are doing. And I'm just really grateful to have this opportunity. Finding solutions for housing has been a passion of mine for a really long time at this point, and more on the focus of the social services and why it's important to figure out how to help individuals get into permanent housing. So I have been with Chico Housing Action Team now for 4 years. And prior to that, I spent many years volunteering with the 6th Street Center for Youth. And I'm going to take you guys on a little bit of a different realm. This isn't concrete solutions. I'm going to talk more of on the social services and why they are needed within housing. So getting people into housing first takes social services. And as we've learned in chat, it also takes social services to keep people in housing for at least a time period. Because a lot of the times people come to us and they have a lot of trauma in their past, or they have generational poverty, just different circumstances that brought them into being unhoused themselves. And having the social services coupled with that allows us to work with those needs, those skills that have been lacking, that they may have not been taught, in order to secure their future and staying within permanent housing. So you can move forward. So I wanted to take a minute to describe social service silos. So this is a concept that there are different silos made for each system. So every one of us kind of have to work within these silos. For me, I have to work in the medical system silo. I have kids that are in school, so I'm integrating into that system by having my children be in school. But a lot of individuals find that they end up needing help, and they end up in other social service silos, such as behavioral health, child welfare, the criminal justice system. A couple of things that I want you to just kind of remember as I continue with them, that these systems are extremely hard to navigate. They all come with their very own language, and they don't talk to each other. So as an individual going to utilize, say, the welfare system, they have an entire set of rules that they have to learn. They have a language with acronyms that they have to learn in order to gain general assistance or get onto CalFresh. And each one of these systems does not communicate at all with the other system, which kind of creates a failure. So now I want to explain a little bit more of the generational trauma and poverty and why it's important for us to understand. So generational trauma comes through forms of like abuse, mental illness. Let's say like grandma and grandpa back in the day, one of them had mental illness, the other had a physical, emotional abuse going on within the house. Mom and dad are now, have moved on, and they have addiction issues. No wealth has been passed down. There's zero knowledge of how to gain any kind of wealth. And so there's just been stacked upon generational trauma and generational poverty. So now you end up with a young adult that needs to kind of get out on their own. So this young adult is so excited about moving out on their own. They want to get out of the community that they have been a part of. They want to move away from the trauma and stuff from their family. But they just don't know how to, because there's not, once again, those social service systems are not super easy to use. And also there's no safety nets for these individuals. So their family can't support any kind of safety net. There's no money for the family to support them, as well as there's no community connections that have been made that can help support these individuals. So because most likely they're living in neighborhoods where that poverty is in the neighbors' houses as well. The trauma is also in the neighbors' houses as well. So it just kind of continues, and systems break down. Safety nets are not available for these individuals to use. You can move on. So now this individual I actually named her Julia. I was going to attempt to kind of tell a story along with us. But so now Julia, say mom and dad got sick somehow. Mom's had to move into the aunt's house, and Julia can't come along. Julia is brand new to adulthood. She just turned 18, and she looks around, has no safety net. So she finds herself in the unhoused community, which is really a community. If you've ever had any kind of time where you've spent in that community, you will realize really fast that there are an entire family systems that are set up in that community. So there are street mom and dads, there's street grandpas that these youth can go to. There are every basic need that you can imagine is out there to gather somewhere within that community. So she ends up in this community, she integrates into this community, she understands how to get her basic needs met. And part of this community also has to do with the social services. So because these two systems are somewhat integrated. So she's learning about different social services that are out there. She's like, oh, I can go sign up for Cal Fresh. I can go use the shower trailer. It's available on these days for me. I know the food's going to be available on these days. And within this, she has come across learning about potential housing. So she is able to, she knows that she needs to call 211. She learned this through the shower program. She calls 211 and she gets connected into chat housing. So chat is able to, okay, let me back up on that. Sorry, she does not get connected into chat housing. Chat is able to pull her off of the 211 list through something called coordinated entry, utilizing a vulnerability index scoring. So she gets pulled off of this list. We do a interview with her, and we're able to then move forward into housing with her. She is automatically put into what we call scattered site supportive housing, so which is the majority of what chat does. We really do not have many places that are like right next to each other. So we have over, my gosh, I think we're at, last number I counted was 83 houses within our community. And most of the time you don't know if you have a neighbor that comes from chat. So what this does is automatically integrates that young individual into our house community. She is no longer needing to necessarily be a part of the unhoused community. But with that comes a whole lot of help needed. And this is where the social services come in. So not only have social services at this point helped secure that housing, but now we need to continue that housing because this young person, once again, has come from generational poverty and trauma. So they don't know the skills needed to navigate the world of living successfully on your own. So how do you budget? How do you get a bank account? Does this person have a driver's license? Those are all part of what we are doing within the social service realm of supportive housing. So, and the goal is to make sure that all of their basic needs are met, but not for us to meet those needs, but for us to help them learn how to meet those needs themselves. And this is something that takes a lot of time and a lot of work with individuals. So this is not something that happens within I hate the concept of even putting timeframes on them because it's so individualized with each person that we work with. But it is something that we try to make sure that they understand and know how to do themselves by the time we are ready to move forward, or they're ready to move forward within our housing. So you can move on. All right, so this is my favorite part. This is where I really think the solutions come in, is figuring out how to rebuild our connections. So the point of me explaining the whole social service silos is that they do not communicate well for the most part. So learning how to build new work with social service systems and creating better collaborations and better communications is one of the things that I like to do, especially in the chat room. We are working on building MOUs with various partners within the community. One of them is True North. So say we get somebody from True North, we want to make sure that there's a soft handoff with case management. We want to make sure that there's time to build trust, and communication is happening well. And so by creating this relationship with True North and with their case management, we are able to better support the individual that's moving into permanent housing. And so another one is behavioral health. We work with a lot of individuals that are connected with behavioral health. And so part of the goal is to have direct communication with whatever program they are connected in with behavioral health and with the case managers that they have in behavioral health, so that we can call them up and say, hey, is there any way you can help support this person? They're having a really tough day, and it has more to do with their mental health than necessarily the housing side of things. And so our goal is to help get them the need that they have within that moment. There was another one I was going to talk. Oh, yeah, and with Everhart Village, I mean, Everhart Village is one closer to a true collaboration than the majority, even the other ones that I've talked about, because it is going to be direct referrals through behavioral health, and then behavioral health itself is going to be on site, which really moves us a little bit more forward in the concept of integrating social services. So if I could dream really big for a second, like we talk about navigation centers. I know that the Jesus Center has talked about some kind of navigation centers, tourist shelters talk about navigation centers, but the goal would be to take all of these social service providers and be able to place them kind of in one location. And so say Julie, this Julia, this young lady I was talking about, she can go to one location. She can walk through those doors, she can open them up, and she can get her needs met. She can sign up for CalFresh. She can figure out how to sign up for all of the housing that's available in the community. She can connect with behavioral health if she needs to. And she can have somebody that's also helping follow her throughout this journey of getting her into housing. Yeah. So to finish that up, I just wanted to say, like, when I talk about like the solutions, I said building those connections and collaborations through our systems, I think is very important. Providing social services for this community as they move into housing is really important. The majority of our houses, it takes anywhere from 6 months to a year to really get somebody all of their basic needs met to a point where they can meet their own basic needs. So, and then just making sure that we're creating opportunities to integrate people into community without not just the scattered site housing where your neighbor all of a sudden was somebody that's just come from off the streets and you have no idea that that's your neighbor, where it mitigates all of the kind of the NIMBYism or the stigma that comes along with it. But also one of the things with chat and also with Everhart Village is kind of being integrated into, and they do really well, is their volunteer teams. So we have many, many community members that come in and they build those connections and they build friendships. And that's not something that you can do when you're out on the streets. So it's building those final connections so that you can go out and feel comfortable with going out and getting a job, with feeling comfortable with going out and integrating back into some kind of religious system or go to school, whatever it is. It really starts with building these connections. So I can see Andy's. Can I just answer that? Okay. Andy forever.
I said thank you. That was really wonderful.
Okay.
We have some questions.
Yeah, so go ahead. You can answer Andy's question, but I'll just read it out for the others. What is the average length of stay of a chat tenancy?
So we consider they're forever homes for the majority of our programs. We do have a handful of different types of programs where we house families and some, youth and others. But our main bread and butter kind of program is our Housing Now, and that is meant to be housing forever. So, and that's the majority of our residents. The other ones are Chico State and a HUSH program, which is meant for families. So Chico State students leave us once they graduate from school, and the house families leave us once they have got into some other secured housing situation.
And about the silos, the earlier question about children in school, how do children who don't have a home end up finding a school?
So in our community, it usually ends up being Chapman. So if they can go and talk to, so if they're part of like the tourist shelter or something like that, they can enroll in Chapman. So any child can enroll in schooling through the Unified School District.
Mhm.
And most of the time they get placed in Chapman.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Other questions, thoughts? Thank you. This is in some ways the most challenging part. We have the real estate side, but then we have the human side. And to hear you say that it takes almost a year
Mhm.
to adjust out of having been homeless
I see
starts
Charles.
to, yeah. So thank you very much. Our next, let me get my screen back up. Our next speaker is Ed Meyer, as in mayor, that's how I can remember, who's executive director of the Housing Authority of Butte County. He's educated as an architect, trained as a planner, and spent the last 30 years building affordable housing. So Ed, welcome.
Thank you, Janet, and thank the League of Women Voters for this event. I love the League of Women Voters. Everybody vote, please. This is what democracy is all about. And talk about democracy, social justice is really what the Housing Authority is about. I'm the director of the Housing Authority here in Butte County. We serve about 3,000 low-income families in Butte and Glenn counties with affordable housing through both housing itself and also rental assistance. This issue of housing and permanent housing has grown in the last 20 and 30 years. In the housing authority business, housing authorities have been around since the 1930s. We're creatures of the New Deal. We run the federal public housing program. And then in the 1960s, the feds brought us the Section 8 housing program, which provides rental assistance. The housing authority right now works with over 600 landlords in Butte and Glenn counties to provide rental assistance to the 2,200 households that are served in Section 8. So we talk about permanent housing and what is permanent housing. We know what it isn't, and that's seeing people on the streets. And we know it's also not transitional or temporary housing. So if we go to the next slide, the first slide, that'd be great. Thank you. But the permanent housing is really a status where a given household has housing that is affordable to them, that is sustainable. And in our economy and with the metrics of the housing markets, not everyone can afford a home. And if they don't have rental assistance, what happens? Our homelessness is really simply a function of the lack of housing in the state. We started this presentation with those numbers, the deficit of housing units. We've been systematically underproducing housing in the state for probably 30 or 40 years now. It's taken us a long time to get to this place. And in Butte County, we have a very acute situation where not only do we have the homeless population that existed prior to the Camp Fire disaster, which really consisted of our elderly, disabled, and youth who'd been displaced through this systematic underproduction of housing, but we also have the post-Camp Fire displaced homeless households coming from Paradise. And of course, in the Camp Fire, we lost 15% of our county's housing stock, 14,000 units. And in the two disasters in the years past, we're now up to 16,400 units lost. And we've by no means replaced anywhere near that housing in the area. So we have this terrible housing shortage before the Camp Fire disaster, and now we have an acute housing shortage. And so what do you do with a lot of homeless and displaced? There's really two things the community needs to think about. One is the immediate situation, triage. Where can people go? Where can they go that is safe? And we spent some time today looking at what Manny brought forward, campgrounds, pallet shelters, tiny houses, et cetera. And then, of course, we have, we have the Jesus Center here in town operating the pallet shelter in Chico, and then also we have the Taurus shelter far north, handling our emergency shelter here in Chico. But regarding immediate help and triage, whether you're talking Chico or Oroville, we know that we don't have enough because there's many people, many households still in our public space. So whatever we've done, it's not been enough. There needs in order to adequately take care of this population. But moving on to permanent housing, permanent housing is expensive in California these days. In our area, it can cost, and I'll show you a couple slides here, anywhere from $350,000 to $500,000 per unit to develop an affordable housing unit. And in order to make it affordable to the occupant, you're going to have to subsidize it over a long period of time. So we're talking about developing housing stock in our area. We're talking about developing housing stock for lower income households. But and that takes special tools. But before we get there, and again, I want to reiterate this point, why are we working so hard to house the homeless? Well, it isn't just a humanitarian issue. It's also an economic issue. I mean, from our perspective, it's mostly humanitarian. Without a house, it's hard to have a family. Without a house, it's hard to have a neighborhood. Without a house, it's hard to have a community. But it's much less expensive to house someone and wrap them in supportive services than it is to have them on the streets. And when I talk about the perfect world, in the world of housing the homeless, the model that we like to go to, the state-of-the-art model, is called housing first. And that's where you take a homeless person off the street, put them in an apartment, and blanket them in supportive services necessary to stabilize the tenancy. That client who's moved in off the street, if they've been on the street for any length of time, will probably take anywhere from 6 months to 2 or 3 years to reacclimate to a conventional lifestyle. So there's this whole piece of supportive services that has to go along with housing of the homeless. But the point is that our average cost in Butte County for housing the homeless is about $900 per household per month. And your average cost of supportive services to backfill that tenancy is around $9,000 to $10,000 a year. So for under $20,000 a year, we can stabilize a homeless household. Whereas the studies have shown that we're north of $40,000 a year, double the price, basically police costs and hospital costs, triage services, social services for maintaining a homeless person on the streets. Next slide, please. Well, this slide shows what the community here, and when I say community, I'm talking about the county of Butte. We have a local coordinating group here in Butte County around relative to the homeless called the Butte Countywide Homeless Continuum of Care. And it's a group of social service providers that concern themselves with homelessness, the stakeholder interests in town. And every year, the federal government funnels about $600,000 to $650,000 to this county for distribution to those doing work on behalf of the homeless. And this chart really shows the work that is being done to establish and stabilize the emergency and transitional housing in the community. And you'll see projects here from Kaminar, which is a nonprofit serving the developmentally disabled, also formerly homeless veterans, Catalyst Domestic Violence Services, True North Housing Alliance, Chico's Homeless Shelter. Again, these are all baseline and very essential programs that are being supported by federal dollars, but you can see how they were prioritized and ordered by the community this year. So this really is here to demonstrate sort of the coordination that goes on broadly in our community by way of homeless response. The sad part is this $600,000 and some odd supports about 54 households. Again, we're looking at around $900 per household per month. But we're obviously way underserved. And here at the Housing Authority, we believe we're only able to serve 1 in 10 who qualify for our services relative to federal rental assistance. Next slide, please. So here's the big picture, really, in terms of permanent housing. Before the Camp Fire disaster, here at the Housing Authority, we had roughly estimated that we needed 6,000 units of multifamily housing in Butte County to sort of level the playing field in terms of supply and demand. Butte County is considered a high-cost area because not because it costs that much for rent and utilities here. We're a lower cost area than the Bay Area or the coastal zones, but we're a high cost area because of the disconnect between housing prices and incomes available to pay for housing. We have very low incomes in this county. We have very high concentrations of elderly and disabled in this county because they can live close enough to services in Sacramento, Davis, and the Bay Area, but still have the benefit of comparatively lower rental housing prices. So we have a very high concentration of low and income households in the area. How do we build housing for them? Well, we need subsidies. And to this degree, after the disaster, with special congressional allocations of federal tax credits and special emphasis on the part of the state for distribution of CDBG-DR and other state funds, we've been able to capitalize on the availability of those dollars. And between the nonprofits in the area and the for-profits in the area, there are right now under construction in Butte and Glenn counties, somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,000 units of affordable regulated housing. When I say regulated, I mean these is housing whose rents are restricted, and they're restricted for 55-year compliance periods underneath state regulatory requirements. So this is long-term affordable housing for our citizenry. There's a lot of it coming online in the next 2 years. So the real question is, will we see the needle move relative to the homelessness we're witnessing on the streets? Because theoretically, many of these projects are targeted directly to those homeless populations. And I'll mention a few. CHIP is developing a 100-unit project called Creekside Place Apartments in Chico, over off of Humboldt, and it'll house 100 seniors. It's got a 15-unit No Place Like Home component to it, where they'll be taking homeless persons off the street with serious mental illness and blanketing them with behavioral health supportive services for that extended use period. So that'll be for singles in Chico, acutely needed. And by the way, I should mention, I really admire the work of Brandon and also Chat in trying to figure out ways to solve the tiny house conundrum. With demographics these days in the United States, we have this enormous demand for seniors, housing to serve seniors. So we have many seniors aging out who have nothing more than Social Security income. They're looking for studio and one-bedroom opportunities. We think Chico is oversubscribed by about 10 to 1. So the work that Brandon is doing, and I call Brandon's work small houses, because how small can you build a house and still have it meet code, versus tiny houses and tent camps, which really are non-code compliant. Very different solution sets, but very important in terms of addressing the demographics that we confront today. There's other projects here, and I won't go through the list in detail, but that serve singles, permanent supportive housing, serving seniors, serving families, scattered mostly through Oroville and Chico. I think there's about half of these, around 1,000 units or so, maybe 1,100 coming online in Chico in the next 2 years. So if you're wondering what all these 3-story apartment buildings going up around Chico are all about, here we are. We're talking disaster response, and we're trying to provide a rare opportunity to deliver a lot of supportive affordable housing on behalf of our community, which is really long overdue. That's it for the moment. Thank you. The last slide here is, I mentioned earlier, the development costs. This just gives you a couple samples. One is a senior project in Orland. The other is a family project in Orland. But you can see, building senior units, you're looking at, in this case, about $385,000 a unit. For family units, they're larger, obviously. We're looking at about $531,000 a unit. There's layered financing, including tax credit proceeds and bonds, state MHP, multifamily housing program dollars, developer fees, deferred developer fees, home program loans. You can see the sources. Most of these affordable housing projects require more than one public grant in order to subsidize the development to the point where it can operate affordably. And then you can see the uses on the side. Most of it's construction, but again, very significant development costs to really address the permanent housing side of this, and it has to be subsidized. We're way behind the 8 ball. And that's it for my commentary on permanent housing. We got a lot going on, very cool, and we don't know where we're going to land.
Thank you very much, Ed. I'm just amazed at the complexity and layers that are involved in this. It's quite it will require a community project. Let's see if we have any questions or chat comments.
Yeah, so we have a couple from Charles. I think he means how many households for the $600,000 funding? I think you said 54 for the COC funding.
That's correct. 54 households are served by that some odd $1,000 for the homeless continuum of care.
And then he asks how many very low income housing units are coming online in the next 12 months?
Well, that's a good question. Kind of tricky because it involves the interface with our Section 8 voucher program, where we're handing out vouchers at any given time. In Chico, we have from 150 to 200 households with Section 8 vouchers looking to lease up. And those households are very low income households. 3/4 of those served in Section 8 have to be below 30% of the area median income. So they're very low income households. They can't find housing, and their success rate, if they get a voucher in the first place, is about 50%. If they don't already live in a house to lease, they can't lease up. So my point is with all this new housing stock coming on, the affordable housing regulated units, a number of them are set aside, about 550 of them are set aside for very low income households through application of project-based vouchers. But all of those 3,000 units are going to be very available to, and those properties are going to be highly motivated to take Section 8 voucher holders, because under these regulated properties, they actually get a premium rent for the Section 8 voucher holder. So my point is that while there's only, let's say, 550 units being dedicated to extremely low income households amongst these 3,000 units, all of those 3,000 units will be able to accept Section 8 voucher holders, which is really the largest program in our area for delivering housing assistance.
Thank you. And from Brandon, how much does a Section 8 voucher pay a landlord for a studio or an individual or a couple?
Okay, very good question. So the Section 8 program, we have a set of payment standards, which are based upon the federal government's assessment of fair market rents in our area. The Housing Authority adopts payment standards by jurisdiction and by housing size, studio, 1, 2, 3 bedroom units. So, but roughly speaking, in Chico, for example, I believe our payment standard for a 1-bedroom unit is around $850 or $900 right now. As I recall, 1 bedroom is fair market rent payment standard $1,035 in Butte County. So the answer is complicated because it depends on the unit size and the geographic location. That information is found on the Housing Authority's website, www.butte-housing.com. Typically, the way the Section 8 program works is that the client, the household with the voucher, pays 30% of its household income for rent and utilities. The federal government pays the rest. So let's say the rent is $1,000 a month, and the household makes $1,000 a month. The household will pay $333 a month, and the federal government will pay $667 a month to make up that rent.
Nicole, looks like there's a question.
Yeah, Jessica Gianola is asking about if credit scores will be an issue with any of the new affordable housing coming online in those projects, because people with low income are more likely to have poor credit, and curious about that barrier.
Very good question. So yes, these projects will be applying credit scores, but I will say that, one of the reasons the Section 8 program is important here, and also the continuum of care, and I'm glad you brought that up, is because for all of these projects and with the Housing Authority, we work very closely with these landlords to help bring people off the coordinated entry system list, the homeless providers list. And we're working very hard to coordinate the delivery of not just housing services, supportive services to these occupying households, but actually housing advocacy, so that when our clients, let's say with a formerly homeless person who's been in a shelter or transitional housing facility with poor credit, they have a housing advocate that can help advocate on their behalf, negotiate with the landlord. There's ways to make up those credit deficiencies. So we do a lot of negotiation with landlords on bringing clients into the system, but it almost always involves the client being supported by a supportive service agency. And this really is the point here, is that how important supportive services are in assisting homeless households moving off the streets.
Yeah. Tara is asking for community members who don't have Section 8 housing vouchers, will coordinated entry assessments and prioritization systems be used for creating access to the new housing units, or will be there a separate application process?
Oh, a number of the projects have committed to the coordinated entry system. And so, for example, the biggest one coming online right off the bat, I'm very interested to see how it goes, will be Chip's Creekside Place Apartments, 100 units. It's all Section 8. All of them are coming off the community's coordinated entry list, is my understanding. No Place Like Home components. So it really will be the first one out of the gate, and we'll see how it works. Anyways, you know, in the community, we're working on what we call this coordinated entry system, CES, and it's being administered by the county on behalf of the continuum of care. But the idea is that everyone who's homeless in the community is identified, their specific needs are identified, and then there's an algorithm that places them on a wait list. And depending on which property opportunity pops up at any given time, that property is fed the appropriate clientele off the coordinated entry list, so that there's a pathway directly out of homelessness into a system that is supposed to deliver housing in the back end. We've been developing that system now for about 2 to 3 years. It's about to really go into high gear to see if it really works. So we're very excited to launch it, and especially with all these new projects coming on board.
Looks like we have one more comment. And
Yeah.
then I'm going to ask each of our panelists for any closing thoughts as we wind down. Mary
There's
Kay?
one more question from Andy. On average, how many are not able to use their Section 8 vouchers?
Okay, to go run through it, basically, we open our waiting list about once a year. We typically receive about 5,500 applications. We do a lottery, typically of about 1,200 to 1,500 that we process in a year. For those who apply, we typically have seen about a 6% success rate post-disaster. Pre-disaster was about a 15% success rate. And don't get me wrong, that's very low. About a third of our applicants are from out of the jurisdiction, a quarter of them are from out of state. Most of those don't make it through our process. But here's the real number. If you get a voucher in your hand, meaning you're here, you get the voucher, you qualified, you've been determined eligible, you get a voucher in your hand, the success rate is about 50%. Which is terrible.
And
Right.
Brandon has another question, and that is, I'm having a heck of a time finding lots to purchase to build my tiny home projects. Do you know if there are any efforts to create more buildable land?
Really good question, and in fact, it's a question that confronts Chip, who one of Chip's programs is a self-help housing program, single-family housing, and they've been bedeviled ever since the Great Recession, trying to lock down and find single-family home lots that are buildable. During the Great Recession, we wiped out most of the North State developers developing land, so there now currently is hard to find lots to develop, and most of the developers I'm aware of, including Chip, have gone back into the land development business where they're buying larger parcels and subdividing. Usually that's a 2 to 3 year process. It's grueling and gruesome, but it's necessary now in order to do single family work. The best opportunity that I know of right now is up in Paradise because of all the vacant lots. There's opportunity up there, but usually those lots are not coherent. They're not together. And in fact, they have difficult site conditions, not to mention septic. So it's problematic in Paradise.
Okay, I'm going to invite, we'll go to the same order we did. This is a surprise question, so you'll have to wing it. But Manny, any closing thoughts based on what you've heard?
Yeah, there's an opportunity to get involved is my closing thought, right? And that's whether it's meeting an unhoused person by name and getting to know their story, so we're a little bit closer to building the community, or raising your hand for an issue that you heard today. So maybe it's putting people in a managed campground or a tiny house, or walking alongside someone that needs Section 8. Do some of that. Maybe it's mental health, maybe it's drug addiction, recovery, but raise your hand and say, I can help, and here's how. That's my challenge, I think, to all of us here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Brandon? You're muted.
Unmute. Yeah, I think Ed had a lot of great points, just as far as, this is something that, it doesn't really matter where you come from. This is something that will benefit everybody, including, everybody from the folks that are suffering out there onto the streets to, businesses who are, having to deal with the challenges around it, and the problems associated with folks and that are, don't have a place to live. I have, I'm probably the righty of this group. I'm just going to say that. But I feel that there are a lot of creative solutions out there, and I'm, trying to think outside the box. But I feel like we need more housing of all types. We need more subsidized housing. I just feel like there's 100,000 houses needed, and we've only got 95,000. So there's going to be 5,000 people without houses. And so, basic economics just says supply and demand drives prices through the roof. Somebody's going to end up without a house. There needs to be vacancy to make a healthy market. So I think we need more housing of all types.
We're stuck. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Amber?
So I'm going to kind of piggyback off of what Manny says. For me, it's all about building those relationships and connections. So get out there and find a place to volunteer. There's many organizations that work with this community, not just chat. I mean, there's 6th Street that you can volunteer at. There's Home and Heart that you can volunteer at. Just find somewhere and meet an individual that's, just come from being unhoused or is currently in that situation, and build a relationship with them. So, because you have no idea how much that's going to help impact their lives, to hopefully bring them into a world that feels more supportive.
Thank you. Ed?
I just wanted to say, I think equitably speaking, we've done this before. There's historic precedent. Back in the 1930s with the Dust Bowl, we had many refugees from Oklahoma arrive in California Central Valley. They were as welcome to our Central Valley as our homeless are welcome on the streets today. They were utterly reviled, and there were so many of them. The federal government had to ultimately come in, and they built initially 6 refugee camps up and down the Central Valley, ultimately became 32. The Housing Authority operates one of those former refugee camps down on the banks of the Feather River in Ridley. It's a 55-acre parcel that was originally set up as a tent camp, and then it became wall tents, and then it became trailers, and then it became permanent housing. We now operate it as a permanent housing site. But my point is in Chico, for example, we have a 60,000-acre park, the largest per capita park in America. You'd think we could carve out a slice and make it available for our homeless, or 2 or 3 slices, and make nice places for them to go. We can all share. These are our mothers, our brothers, our sisters, our uncles. These are our own people. And until we get the permanent housing opportunity, and Brandon, I couldn't agree with you more. All housing of all kinds. We have suffocated ourselves based on single-family home interests over the last 40 years. And it is time. We need housing at all levels, all costs. So we've done it before. We can do it again. And if we want to make it nice, we're all going to have to jump in, educate, and make it happen. So, but anyways, wonderful panel to be on. Great work being done.
Thank you, panelists. And I want to just take 1 minute and thank my committee. Charles Withun, raise your hand so we know who you are. Everybody knows who you are. Andy Holcomb, Mary Kay Benson, Nicole Drummond, Shelley Gates, and thanks to the California Poppies. There is Michelle Desmond, who is at OLLI and has been our trusty tech person the whole way and has helped make it work. Thanks to the League, thanks to OLLI, thanks to all of you. Have a great night. This will be recorded. It will be available online at the League site and at other sites. So if you wish to share it with people, please do. Thank you all.
There's one more Q&A if you want me to read it. This is from Anne Nikolai, the director of OLLI. I just want to say how much I appreciate the work you all do behind the scenes to affect positive change. Yay to the League for bringing this conversation forward You've all made it so clear that there's so much we can do, so much to be done.
Thank you. Thank you, Anne. Thank you all. We'll be organizing session 3, and I think that you all may have something to say for that too. So it will be sometime next semester. Thank you all. Good evening.
You. Thank